guys? Welcome back to episode 12 of Play Like a Girl. Unfortunately, Laura isn't here due to a school function, but we have an amazing guest. As you can see, she's right here. She is a 2 times Fargo All-American, 3 times Super 32 All-American, Oklahoma Folk Style National All-American, 2018 Super 32 National Champion, 2020 Prep New England Champion, 2020 Prep National Champion, Massachusetts Trisha Saunderson Award winner, 2020 UWW Junior National Champion, and the first female to wrestle for Lehigh University. So those are unreal accomplishments, and we have Marisol Nugent here. Sorry, I butchered your last name. Can you hear me?
No worries.
Oh, great. How are you?
Yep. Your mic's sticking out a little bit, but you're good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. I had a bit of a long day, but it's fine. So I want to jump right into your questions. I want to know how you got into wrestling.
I started wrestling when I was maybe in the 4th grade. My dad wrestled when he was in high school at Linfield, which is like a couple towns over, but then he also went on to wrestle collegiately at Boston College. He originally started with my twin brother. I have a twin brother who's the same age as me. Well, he's a grade below me, but we like grew up together. And then I have a younger brother as well, who both kind of started wrestling a couple years prior to me. I have 2 younger sisters that also wrestle, and I think like by the time I got to 4th grade, I was kind of sick of watching all the wrestling tournaments. You know, like I used to go sit on the mat side and cheer on my brothers, and I'd go watch their practices. You know, kind of like play at their wrestling tournaments, like on the side of the mat, just kind of watching what they were doing, trying to mimic it a little bit. But you know, like when I first became interested in wrestling in maybe 2nd grade, there was a pretty big stigma around it. You know, it's a male-dominated sport. And I don't think people are really ready at the time necessarily to like experiment with bringing like a young girl into it.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, once I reached 4th grade, me and my dad finally decided that, you know, he would give me a pair of shoes and I would start wrestling and doing some things. And I kind of like slowly integrated into the sport, if that makes sense. Like I kind of waited until I was a little bit older to start competing nationally, and just kind of like built on it over time. Eventually, you know, I'm now wrestling in college. But it was kind of like a slow progression just because of how new females are to the sport, if that makes sense. They didn't really have any youth tournaments for a woman, so I had to go co-ed, which was a little bit challenging. But you know, my dad got me into wrestling. He's coached me for the past, I don't even know, it's just a very long time since I was in 4th grade, along with like my 4 younger siblings. So that he kind of got us into it. He owned a wrestling club. He owned a wrestling room as well in Danvers. So you know, he would take us down there on holidays and stuff, and we'd all just wrestle with each other.
That's
So he's probably the biggest factor in that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's pretty cool though that you said that, because your entire family wrestles, which is
Mm-hmm.
I don't wrestle, but my entire family is like a skating family. So me and my sister were figure skaters, and my brother played hockey. So we grew up on the ice, and our dad also. Well, my dad was my brother's hockey coach or rollerblading coach for like a little bit, but not to like the collegiate level. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So you said that your dad played in high school. Does he have like any old tapes that you watch, or does he just like share his memories with you?
Yeah, he'll kind of like reminisce sometimes over like his college wrestling memories, you know, talk to us about how he competed at like sectionals and states and, you know, his placements and stuff like that. But I think mostly he kind of just tries to pass on knowledge to us rather than, you know, like I guess experiences or stories. He doesn't really talk about himself too much. Every now and then, like we'll see a picture of him in either like, you know, his BC uniform or his Linfield Wrestling Pioneers um, gear, but he doesn't really show us too much of his matches or him wrestling either. Like I think he wrestled in a alumni event a couple years ago against some other like um Linfield wrestling alums, and that was like the first time that we'd all really seen him wrestle. Um, but he definitely likes passing on a lot of information to us, if that makes sense. You know, he's always telling us at dinner at night, you know, what moves we can work on, where we can develop, what we can do better, what our goals should be. You know, I was out in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and he was still emailing me full setups of, you know, you need to hit a 2-on-1, and when you're in a match, you know, you need to be a little more conservative, like don't always force the pace. So he's always been really involved and mostly just kind of like giving us all the knowledge that we know into the sport.
Yeah, no, I feel you. That's amazing though, because like to have your parent do the same sport that you did, you just like, it's not that you learn differently, but it's just it makes you a little more passionate and a little more like like drive to do it, you know? I feel you on that.
Yeah, definitely.
So did you do any other sports growing up, or did you just start like wrestling right in fourth grade when you said that you wanted to get on the mats?
I've always done like a lot of sports. I was a little bit of like a an aggressive soccer player when I was younger. I played soccer. I experimented with like lacrosse. Mostly I played field hockey throughout high school. I think up until my junior year when I tore my ACL. I played
Mm,
um I played my freshman, sophomore, and junior seasons on varsity. 1 year at Mascoma Regional High School, and then 2 years at Phillips Academy where we made the New England Finals and then won a New England title. And then my senior year I had to sit out because of an ACL tear. But I like played pretty competitive field hockey. My team was competitive, but I was more of like, kind of getting like a workout in. I wasn't super developed in field hockey in comparison to wrestling, so that was kind of like a sport that I did for fun.
mm.
But I have a lot of like really good memories from it. And I loved it a lot. So
That's it's good to always play multiple sports because you can carry something from one sport to the other. Like they're it's not that they're the same, but you can always like learn from the other sport. But
yeah, definitely.
I want to talk about your ACL tear. How did that happen?
It was kind of two separate events. I was actually down in Rhode Island at, I want to say, I was at a Beat the Streets Providence clinic. I was coming off a concussion. I had been concussed for about 3 to 4 weeks, and I was just starting to get onto the mat at this one clinic. And I was in the middle of a live go with the girl, and I was trying to throw her, and she just would not let me throw her. And because of that, like my knee just shifted pretty weirdly. And that's when I like sprained my ACL, they think, because I got it checked out like a week later, and they didn't think my ACL was torn. Um, but then I was at a separate practice a little bit later, and a kid on my team kind of like tried to tackle me as a joke. And he was 195 pounds. I think I was like maybe 130, 140 at the time. So I was, really small.
Mhm.
He tried to tackle me as a joke. And when like he lifted my leg up in the air and pulled on it, we just heard like a pop in my knee, which was like my ACL tearing. So that was a little bit traumatic. But it was kind of built up over time. Like my knee just wasn't super strong. Girls are more likely to tear their ACL, and just like these two separate like situations built together, my knee just couldn't like withstand it. So
Yeah, for sure.
it
I
was gone.
I actually know what a knee injury feels like. I didn't tear my ACL. That would have been like I don't know how I would have dealt with that. But I was like I told you I'm a skater. I was working my camp one day and I was showing a younger girl like something called the twizzle and I fell on top of my knee and it just felt like fire was in my knee the entire time
Hmm.
and I didn't want to believe that something happened. So I kept going to work and then after like 2 days I was like, no, something's wrong. And when we went to go get an MRI, it came back with like a slight tear in my PCL. But then when I went to
Hmm.
physical therapy, my therapist was looking at the x-rays and he was like, you sprained your knee too. And I was like, oh great. So
Hmm.
that's painful, but I feel you. It's hard to come back from that. What was your like how was that comeback process for you?
Physically aggressive, but like I guess like emotionally like very challenging. Like for me, I just won like my first really big tournament in October, and then I tore my ACL in December. So, I kind of felt like I was on like this upward trajectory. I was winning matches that like I hadn't won in the years prior, so I was really like happy with where my wrestling ability was at the time. I felt like, this was going to be my year to win, every tournament I entered in, and I was really excited about that. So to hear that like I torn my ACL was pretty devastating. I went through the process of like feeling really sorry for myself and like, thinking that I may never wrestle again because the reality of like tearing your ACL junior year is one, it's like really hard to get recruited, but two, like when you're already in the women's wrestling field, there's not a lot of places to go. So I just didn't really think that I had that much of a future in wrestling. Like I thought for like at least like a month that, it might be over. They thought my rehab would last through my senior season, so I wouldn't be able to wrestle my senior year, which was really hard to hear. So I just used that kind of like to motivate myself to get back on the mat a little bit sooner. So I just like rehabbed really hard for 6 months and was able to get back on the mat 6 months ahead of time, so that I could compete my senior year. So there was like a lot of ups and downs with it. Like I just, I was really upset a lot. Like I went out to nationals the year that like I felt like I could won as a spectator, and just kind of like watched everyone compete, and that was like hard for me. But I think it also fueled me because I wanted to dominate everyone. Like when I got back, like I wanted to have the best rehab, the strongest rehab, and kind of like prove to people that I wasn't really going anywhere. And I think like ultimately like I got myself to that point, but it was really hard too because it's kind of like a struggle like every day, like every PT session to kind of like remotivate yourself and like push through any pain or any like blocks that you're seeing. So
No, I definitely remember when my injury happened. I was like, okay, that's it. Like, I cannot like skate anymore. There's no way I'm going to finish my tests. Like, I literally remember going to physical therapy every day and being like, is this even worth it? You know, like,
hmm
so I kind of feel where you're coming from. How did you like overcome the little voices in your head that were saying, like, why did this happen? Is it even worth wrestling anymore? Should I just quit? Like, how did you overcome those thoughts?
I think like I have like a couple factors always like kind of like motivated me through my rehab. One is just like the fact that I love wrestling. I was like pretty sad without it, and it was something that I wanted to go back to recreationally, if not competitively. Like I knew it was going to be different, but I still wanted to be involved in the sport, regardless. So I just like I love wrestling. I love being on the mat. I love scrambling with people. Like I love a hard match. So I kind of just want to like get back on the mat just to be able to like just like to kind of like be happy. Like you're kind of like fulfilling your passion. Like whenever I go to wrestling practice. And like, I always feel good after wrestling practice. So I was like, I wanted that feeling again. But also like I just have a really good support system at home. Like I said, like with my siblings and with my dad, like we're all really close and they're kind of able to, keep me positive with it for the most part. Like I say, like especially my parents are the biggest factors with that. My dad especially, like even when I was at college, like I called him like 3 times a day. Like he was definitely getting annoyed with me, but I can kind of always like lean on him for stuff if that makes sense. Like he's kind of like my emotional support. He helps me get through a lot of things, and same with my mom. So they're a really big factor. Like I also had a wrestling club that they let me stay around even though I was hurt, and like that, I'm really grateful for that. Like I was still going on trips with them, kind of staying in the loop, watching the workouts if I couldn't participate in the workouts. So that was really important as well because like I was still a part of the team, so I wanted to get back to be with them again. But at the end of the day, like I also say like a really big influence in my life is like my youngest sister. She's so much younger than me that like I know that any impact that I have right now, like in the collegiate circuit, can help, people her age when they're older have college wrestling opportunities. So I still wanted to go and wrestle in college and try to get something done. So that way, when she's my age and she was looking for a wrestling program, that maybe I could provide her with one or give her the foundation to build her own. So,
Well, that's great. I'm also very close with my family, and my sister is like my best friend, so I know how that feels for you. So obviously wrestling is a male dominated sport, and obviously people talked when you were at matches, or people had something to say about being a female wrestler, and that's like so mental, and that's also wrestling is such a mental game. How would you say that you stay grounded when you're at matches? Or you like you turn away and just forget about what people are saying?
well, I can say like for a while, I think when I was really young, like when I first started wrestling in like fourth through sixth grade, I didn't stay grounded. I was really bad about it. Like I always kind of felt like I kind of had like a chip on my shoulder. Like I felt like if I lost a match, that it was kind of like the end of the world. Like that, like I
Yeah.
was kind of like an embarrassment for women's wrestling, if that made sense. I felt like I had to win every match just to kind of like earn respect. So when I didn't, it felt like the walls were kind of like crashing around me. So that's something I really had to work on, just like over the course like my wrestling career is kind of realizing that like every match isn't do or die. Like it doesn't matter what people are saying, like I kind of have to wrestle for myself. I think when I was like as I got older, like my dad did a really good job making sure that I kind of like was able to block out negativity at tournaments. Like I will say like New England's a very open wrestling community, if that makes sense. Like I felt by the time that I left, like people were very respectful of women's wrestling and respectful of me and of my ability, to the point that, I felt like I could wrestle with confidence and that like the people in the audience were supporting me rather than kind of, wondering why I was there. So it was just kind of like over time was something that I had to work on, was kind of like understanding the situation and that, not everyone is out to get me. Like a lot of people were really supportive of me. Like I loved having moms would usually come up to me and say like, oh, like my daughter loves watching you wrestle, she's gonna try it out next week or something like that. So it's been really good, and I think I realized too as I got older that the best thing that I could do for women's wrestling in New England and like helping grow it is just to provide like a good example for younger girls.
Yeah.
So kind of like getting involved in youth practices was important, but also managing my behavior on the mat too and off the mat was also really important. And when I was younger, like I said, like I did a really bad job of that just because I was so stressed all the time. Whereas, like as I got older, I got more confident in my ability, more confident in like my purpose there, if that makes sense. Like I started to feel more like I belonged on the wrestling mat. Whereas like for a while, I think I felt like I didn't, and that just made everything very stressful for me.
Yeah, no, I feel you. I mean, I think it's great that you started feeling confident in the future because as long as you like if you start at the bottom, as long as you build your way up, that's fine. Like when I was younger, I remember if I lost a competition, I'd be like, "Oh my God, really?" Like I would just be so pissed
Mhm.
off. And then like growing up, I would realize, okay, next time I can try harder. Okay, there's something that I can fix, like blah blah blah. And henceforth. But I also want to know like talking about how it was a mental game in the prior question, if your sister came up to you or if a younger female wrestler came up to you and said that something was getting on her nerves or how she kept losing her matches and she felt like her walls were breaking down, like you said, what is the advice that you would give to that girl or to your sister when she told you that that's what was going on in her head?
I mean, like the advice that I've always kind of given to younger girls is like, if you're going into every practice and you're thinking like you're working your hardest, then there's no reason that you should be, insecure when you get on the mat. I think that losses are more reflective of like what you need to work on and where you can get back in the practice room and develop rather than, saying that you're a bad wrestler because you lost a match. So it's just kind of trying to like change the mindset with the younger girls that, losing isn't everything, losing is an opportunity to grow. Um, and like I think my younger sister too does get like a little stressed every now and then with wrestling. I think everyone does. It's a high pressure sport. It's really intense in the practice room at tournaments, weight cutting, there's a lot
Yeah.
of aspects of it that are just pretty stressful. So I think it's like important for me, like when I'm talking to younger girls, to kind of have them like see the bigger picture that you're doing wrestling because you love it, not to win. Like you're a wrestler because you love wrestling, and that should always kind of be like the focus of the sport. Is the second like some aspect of it like doesn't be like isn't fun for you anymore at the youth level, then like then you need to stop doing it. And I kind of like even when I'm talking to my younger girls about cutting weight, like I don't think there's any reason that like a middle school or like a elementary school girl should be cutting more than like maybe 5 pounds. Like when I was younger, I think like I had to lose 9 pounds in one day and I was like, I'm never wrestling again. So, it's kind of like you need to eliminate like the high pressure aspects of it like that. And when like it's time for these girls to compete, they just have to go out and be confident in their training. Because at the end of the day, like competition's supposed to be fun, wrestling's supposed to be fun, practice is supposed to be fun. Like sports are for our enjoyment. So
No, yeah, I completely agree. That's everything I would have said to the younger skaters if they came up to me with a problem like that. But on that note, let's take a slight commercial break, and when we come back, we will continue to talk about your life and how you pursued wrestling and maybe how COVID affected wrestling at Lehigh. So let's take a short break. Hi guys, welcome back to episode 12 of Play Like a Girl. We have Marisol here, and we were just talking about what it was like growing up wrestling and any advice you would give to younger girls. But now I want to get into Lehigh and how you are the first female wrestler there. How does it feel to be the official first female wrestler at that school?
it's definitely there's a lot of different aspects to it. I remember when I was younger, when I met the first female wrestler at Columbia University for the first time, I was like her biggest fan just because like I thought what she was doing was so amazing. Um, so, it's like it's an interesting situation to be in right now. It's tricky because it's COVID time, so everything kind of doesn't really feel super real and like solidified, if that makes sense yet. I did my first tournament for the Lehigh Valley RTC last when was that? 2 weekends ago now, last weekend I think, which was actually like a really rewarding experience, and it was great to kind of I think for me, like whenever I wrestle, it's just kind of like showing girls that they have the opportunity to, get a high level, be in a high level academic setting while still also being able to pursue your athletics. That's something that like we don't see a lot in the women's college wrestling circuit. just because of the lack of like Division 1 opportunities. So I think, you know, like whenever someone like me goes out there and competes and does well, um, and like it kind of shows that you can beat the odds. So um, that's just like whenever I wrestle, I just think it's like, you know, it's kind of like another opportunity to show girls that, you know, you can be in a strong academic setting and also still pursue your athletic goals. So that's kind of like how I've been viewing the whole, you know, wrestling at Lehigh situation. It's a developing women's wrestling. I don't want to say program because it's really hard to move forward with the varsity program, but it's a developing situation down there for sure. Especially being the first girl, like the coaches have never had a female wrestler before, so I think like a lot of them are a little bit confused kind of as of what to do with me right now, which is expected because you know there's a change in rules. Like there's simple things like wrestling facilities really only have boys locker rooms, so it's like small problems like that come up, and you kind of have to problem solve and fix it. So it's like it's a lot of learning right now, especially for the coaching staff. You know, they've been in touch with a lot of women to try to learn, I guess, how to best support like a female wrestler in their program. And that's something that, you know, a lot of programs and organizations are trying to educate D1 coaches on a lot more is like how to support a female wrestler that wants to join their program. So we're kind of in that early stage right now at Lehigh with
Okay.
me.
Well, I mean, I feel like as long as they're trying to make you feel like, well, obviously they're making you feel welcome, but as long as they're trying to make you feel comfortable and like they know what they're doing, that's good. But I hope that things advance there. So what would you say? I know you said that you had a tournament or was it a match 2 weeks ago? How
hmm
has COVID affected that? Like, what are the precautions you guys have to follow? Is your training different? Like, what is going on with that?
There's a lot of, especially like being at Lehigh University right now, like and being on a college campus in regards to training, like COVID has just kind of altered everything pretty much. Like for example, I wrestle at the Regional Training Center, and because of COVID, they're not allowed to practice at Lehigh University anymore. So we have to practice at a facility like 10 minutes away. So that's like one thing is, you know, I don't have access to on-campus facilities because of COVID. So like things such as like the Lehigh wrestling room, the Lehigh like gym, I don't have access to. So that made things like a little bit tricky for the fall semester because you know I was kind of working on my own with like whatever I had, whatever resources were available. Like I moved the spin bike into my dorm room just to try to make things work. COVID from a tournament perspective has really just like eliminated a lot of different opportunities to compete. Normally by now there'd be a lot of different like college opens or USA Wrestling sanctioned events that, you know, I could be competing at for like my freshman year of college. And because of COVID, they've really like restricted those numbers. Like there's only been one tournament. A lot of us right now are kind of like, oh, when are we even going to compete again? And
Yeah.
then, you know, like when we do get to a tournament, there's a lot of COVID protocols as well. Um, like obviously they want you to scan yourself every day before you go into the facility and check for symptoms. They want to check your temperature. They want to make sure everyone's wearing a mask. They want to limit the people on the mats and like in the tournament um, venue. So it's definitely a lot different. It's a lot stricter. I personally don't mind it because I think that most wrestling tournaments are pretty claustrophobic. Like there's so many people, so now there's less. So
Yeah.
I'm fine with that aspect of it. But it's definitely harder to find competition and resources available for athletes right now.
That's a little frustrating though, like not to know when your next tournament is. Are you guys like still training daily or is there some like are there restrictions to training?
hmm so I'm not technically affiliated with, I think like the Lehigh wrestling program right now, so I have a different like standard for what I'm supposed to be doing and how I can like conduct my practices in COVID time. I know for Lehigh wrestlers on campus currently, like the males, they're not allowed to leave for I think Thanksgiving or Christmas just because they're trying to keep like a bubble, if that makes sense, of kids that who, you know, have been all tested negative for COVID and they can stay together and they can train and hopefully compete later on in the winter. For me and like my RTC partner who also just won U23 nationals out in Nebraska, we usually take a week off after competition just to let our bodies heal. Like for me, I've had knee problems for a while since my ACL tear, so you know I usually take a week just to allow swelling to go down, to start some PT exercises and just like little things like that. For me personally, like with COVID kind of restricting our future competition, like I think it's just important to kind of like use this time to develop and make good use of it. Practice a lot of technique, get my cardio up, start lifting, like not worry too much about my weight. Like kind of like minor things like that. Like you just have more time to kind of perfect like the small things, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So this week I'll have off, and then next week I'll probably start like trying to be on the mat 5 to 6 times a week.
Okay.
So
Well, it's good to give yourself a little break though, because the knee
mhm.
injuries are very painful. I know. But so let's get away from COVID. And Ron actually told me that the Fargo All American competition or tournament that you went to was like the biggest in the country, and you are the champion. So how did that feel?
So Fargo's one of the bigger tournaments in the country. I didn't win Fargo. I won Super 32 and UWW trials, which are also pretty big tournaments. Fargo's a really big tournament because it's the only one that you get to represent like your state from, and like the way that it's structured is a lot different. You travel as a part of your state's team, so that's kind of a cool experience for a lot of people who, especially if you live in a bigger state like California or Texas, like you're meeting a lot of people and traveling with them for the first time, so it's a pretty cool experience. For me, when I went to Fargo as a freshman, I actually had to travel with Team Maine, even though I'm from Massachusetts, because we didn't have a women's team. There was a men's team out there, but I had to wrestle with the Maine women's team just because we didn't have a female director or something like that. Um, so that was definitely an interesting experience. Like, it's really cool to be wrestling at like the national level, but it's also kind of, I don't really know how to explain the feeling, but like I wasn't representing my home, so I guess it felt a little bit different. Like I think a lot of people have like that state pride, like when they have, Texas or Florida or something written across their chest, and I was just kind of like, oh, like I'm from Massachusetts, but I'm here with Maine, and like I don't really know these people super well, but um, it was still like a really good experience overall. It's just like I think it would have been a little cooler to like do well for Massachusetts, but that's fine. Like for a while after Fargo, I was in the rankings as like Marisol Nugent from Maine, and I didn't really like that because I was like, no, like I'm a Massachusetts girl. Like I'm like born and raised in Massachusetts, so I wanted to represent them. Um, but it was a really cool experience overall. Like I think I made when I was a freshman, I think I made the semis twice, and then I ended up getting fifth place twice to earn All American status, which was cool. But I wish I could have gone back and won that tournament.
Yeah. Well, that's still really good though. Like if it's the biggest in the country, fifth is really good. So let's say, okay, so I want to know where your favorite place to travel to was for a tournament.
Um, so when I was having my ACL tear, when I was in the middle of rehab, my wrestling club, Doughboy Wrestling Club from Lowell, Mass, went to Disney Duels and I was a table worker. So I wasn't actively wrestling that trip, but I was there with my teammates who are all like my best friends.
Mhm.
And like we got to go to Universal. We were wrestling at ESPN Wild World of Sports. The team was doing pretty well too, which is always exciting. Like when you have like really close duel meets that you're winning by a couple points and everyone's like, really into it. And it's a super competitive environment. Like I love that. So that was definitely like my favorite trip. We were supposed to do it again this year with a girls team, to bring a girls team and a boys team, but unfortunately COVID happened, so we weren't able to do that, which is sad. But I'd say Disney Duels is a really good trip in Florida, and then also NHSCA Nationals in Virginia Beach is also a really fun tournament, just because I love watching the Doughboy dual team compete. Like I don't even wrestle for them at these duels. I just love watching them. Like it's like the best environment to be in, I think, as a wrestling fan.
I definitely agree with the environmental aspect of things. When I used to skate, I remember just being at competitions and sitting back and watching the older girls who competed for Team USA or whoever they were competing against, and I was like, whoa! Like just the environment and everybody that was around you, the screaming from the audience is just crazy. Have you
Hmm.
ever been to? I was gonna say my favorite place that I've traveled to is California. Have you ever been there before for a match?
No, the destinations for wrestling that me and my dad have been to have always been kind of random. Like we went out to Omaha, Nebraska, Fargo, North Dakota, Irving, Texas, Greensboro, North Carolina. Like it's all pretty random
Mhm.
right now, but nothing on the West Coast for me.
Would you say that like when you've traveled to those places, they like the matches and everything was different because of the audience that was there? Or would you say that everything was kind of like the same aspect?
I think like when you go to those national tournaments versus like the local or even like regional type level events. The national ones is just it's such a different environment. Like the tournaments are structured differently and run differently, but also like the level of competition there is a lot more intense. I think everyone there's a little bit more serious. So that way, like when big matches do happen, you have like they're like anticipated and you have an audience that's really excited to watch. Whereas kind of at like local tournaments, a little more like low key. I really like kind of like the idea of being on like a business trip when you go out to like these national tournaments though, and everyone's really serious. So for me, kind of like to be around like all these like-minded people that just kind of want to, you know, do their matches and leave and all that stuff. I like that personally. So I love doing like those types of trips.
Okay. Well, that's great. I forgot to ask you this question before when we were talking about Lehigh, but when you said that they were learning how to cope with like the first female wrestler there. How did it feel to like have all eyes on you when you first walked in, or like whenever you're in a match? Like, how does it feel to have all eyes on you and everyone's like, that's the first female, like this is crazy. How does it feel?
To be honest, like I haven't really dealt with that much pressure in that regard, if that makes sense. Like I've kind of been pretty low key like at practices. Like people kind of like acknowledge that I'm there, but it's never kind of like, whoa, like they're just kind of like, oh, like another person is in the room.
Yeah.
Um, it's really not that big of a deal for them. And I think, like for my coaches, like my current coach Buxton at the LVWC, he's coached a lot of females before, so it's not really new for him exactly, but it's new more for like the administration, if that makes sense. So he's the best coach ever. Like I love him. He's awesome to work with. But for even from like a competition aspect too, like when I went out, no one from Lehigh went out with me besides Buxton. So it was like also a really calm environment because he kind of knows me and knows my wrestling style. So instead of making it kind of like, okay, like I have to do well, like just to prove to people that, like I belong here or whatever, he was kind of like, just trust your training, trust your ability, and go out and show people what you can do. So I don't think there was ever too much like pressure on me from that regard. Um, so like that's something I'm actually like pretty thankful for. That's been very like laid back. So I can kind of just wrestle and train and like whatever happens, happens.
Okay. Well, you said when you were speaking before that you love your new coach from Lehigh. Is there any coach that you would say has like left an imprint on you or has impacted you so much that like you just hold them to a high regard?
I've been wrestling with Buxton for well, if you're in the wrestling community, everyone knows Buxton. Like I've been to one tournament with him, and he's like a little he's like a local celebrity there. Everybody loves Buxton. He's coached at really high levels. He's coached like the men's national team. The men's like I think they were saying he was supposed to be the Olympic team coach this year and all that stuff. So he's seen a lot of really high level wrestling. So I'm always really grateful to work with him. I've only been wrestling with him for like 2 months, like I said earlier, and it's just like I've developed so much that I'm just super thankful for like the time that he's given me as like one of his athletes.
Mhm.
Um, One coach that like I think is always gonna be like really dear to me, that like I'm gonna know throughout the rest of my life is definitely like my high school coach, Coach Cassie Archambault. She was the first female head coach in the New England Prep, which was a big deal. Like she coached me to a 2020 Prep national title. Mostly she's just like a really good support system. Like she wrestled in high school a couple like maybe like a decade ago. So she kind of knew what it was like for me, going through the college recruiting process, like kind of struggling to make weight, just kind of like the normal problems that female wrestlers have in high school that like most coaches are kind of unaware of just because they didn't have to deal with it in the past. She was super on top of. So, she's always been really supportive of me. Like even when I compete in the summer or like even when I was competing in college, like she's still staying in touch with me, still kind of, giving me feedback on my matches, still wishing me luck before every tournament. So she's awesome. And like, I think she's always going to be someone that's like very involved in my life. And, if I do go on to keep wrestling at like the Olympic or senior level, she's going to be someone that helped me get there for sure.
Well, she sounds like a great person. Was there anything
She's
that,
awesome.
is there anything like specific that she said that like you'll keep with you for the rest of your life?
I can't really say anything specific that like she said. It's more so I guess like what she's like done for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like I remember right after I tore my ACL, I was watching nationals on my laptop on bed rest. That was a tournament I was supposed to go to that I thought I could win. So
Mhm.
I was pretty upset. And I remember she came and sat with me, um, you know, and was just kind of like telling me not to worry about it because, I think she always knew that, I was gonna recover, like I was gonna get back to where I needed to be, like athletically and like my mindset wise too, even though sometimes like I didn't believe it, like she always believed it.
Yeah.
Um, which was really important to me. Like she's always supported me no matter what, regardless of like what weight class or like how I did in the tournament. She's always been there. Like she's always believed in me. So that's kind of just like how I'm always like going to remember her as one of my biggest supporters, probably.
No, yeah, that's great. And it's kind of like, you know, what you said, actions speak louder than words. And I can definitely agree with you because I have had coaches in my past who will stay with me forever and who have literally left an imprint on me. And it wasn't just through their words, it was through their actions too. And that's just amazing to have like coaches, but also teammates. You said your teammates are your best friends. It's great to have a support system because like I know from an injury, they're still by your side and they're still like, you know what, it's fine. You're going to get through this. Like, we still love you. You're going to be our teammate forever, you know?
Exactly.
So what would you say was one of your greatest memories from wrestling or from your teammates?
For my teammates was definitely, I want to say, the Super 32 finals that I was in 2018 in October. I have a big wrestling club in Massachusetts. It's probably the biggest in Massachusetts, and we had brought like 30 something guys to the tournament with us. Um, I was competing. I was competing throughout the day, and they were all kind of there watching me, like following me from mat to mat. Like whenever I wrestle and they're at the tournament, like they'll kind of like line up along the mat sides, and I'll just walk end up with like this huge corner, which I love because like one of the things
Oh no, I think you cut out.
the team with them, whereas like for the most time like I have either like a couple coaches or a giant team with me that's always like supporting me, kind of like hyping me up before my matches. Um, so like when I was wrestling in the Super 32 finals, I'd had a pretty easy day so far. Like I'd pinned everyone or teched them, so like my team was kind of like, oh, like you're gonna win this, you're gonna win this, you're gonna win this. And then I got out to the match and I was losing. I was losing the match 10-4 going into the second period, so I only had like 3 minutes to kind of figure it out. And I ended up hitting a throw that pinned the girl, and you could just hear like the entire sidelines. Like I had 10 coaches in my corner, like 30 kids on the mat side. Like they were all just going crazy. Like they were so happy for me. And I thought that was just like a really cool experience to kind of like get my hand raised and be able to like run over to like this corner of people that were just like so happy and like so supportive of me and kind of have like seen everything that I've done to get to that moment. And now they got to be a part of it. So that's definitely like my favorite moment with like my team and with my coaches back at home.
Well, that's great. I definitely agree. Whenever your team is there just supporting you, you can hear them screaming through the audience. Like that's the best feeling ever. I was on a team, but I also like skated by myself. And whenever I had a show or a competition, my entire team was always lined up near the glass, and they were like smacking it, and they were like Gianna, like before I skated, and it was just like the best feeling ever because it's like your best friends are going to support you no matter what you do throughout your life. It's honestly the best.
Exactly.
Well, wow. Okay. So I just have one last question. I always ask this to our guests whenever they're on the show, but I just want to know, what do you think it means to play like a girl, and why is it important for the younger generations to understand what that means?
Hmm. Well, for me, I don't know. I guess it's like kind of hard to define this.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like for me, like playing like a girl has always just meant like being confident. Like, like they said, like in wrestling, like I think a lot of people try to let like gender like define you. Like I think a lot of opponents like they see me and they kind of write me off because they're just like, oh, like it's a girl, like I'm gonna beat a girl.
Yeah.
Like like they're pretty quick to like undermine like my ability. And I see it too with like my little sister. Like my little sister is like one of like the fiercest wrestlers I've ever seen. And like you kind of see boys go out to wrestle her and they're just like, and she'll go out there and she'll like beat them up a little bit and they'll end up being very surprised. But like for me, like to play like a girl, I guess, is always just meant to like be confident and like in yourself and in your performance and really like not let what other people are saying like define you or define like your ability. um like I think for a while I thought like being a girl in wrestling was such a burden because I was like everyone underestimates me, but it kind of just like gives me the ability to prove them wrong like every time I step on the mat, to outwork in the wrestling room or just to like practice super hard just so that like people respect me and what I'm doing, and just to kind of be like confident in that. So like that's what I always tell like my little sister and like the girls around me is kind of like just work hard, like just work hard and win matches, and like no one will be able to say anything about you really, because it's like if you prove like I don't even think you really should have to prove that you belong there, but it's kind of like, you know, after a certain amount of time of working like super hard, like you just get like this level of confidence in which what everyone says about you like doesn't really matter anymore. So that's kind of what I think it means to play like a girl.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That was a great answer to that question. Well, I really appreciate you taking your time out of your day to come on our show, and it was so great to kind of meet you. But
Yeah, of course. Thank you guys so much for having me.
problem. I hope you have a great rest of your night.
Thank you, you too.
No problem. Bye. Okay, so that was Marisol. What an amazing guest. She has an unreal list of accomplishments, and I love talking to her. She's just accomplished so much, and she just holds herself to such a high standard, and I love that about her. But don't forget to tune into episode 13 of Play Like a Girl next week. Hopefully, Laura will be back. And as you know, this is the podcast Play Like a Girl for the girls. Bye.